Very good day to all of you. It is my absolute pleasure and honor to have this conversation with a very well-known senior neurologist to the World Federation Neurology community. This is Professor Ryuji Kaji from Kyoto, beautiful Kyoto, Japan, and he is our vice president at this point of time. Professor Kaji, very good morning to you. How are you today?
Fine, and good morning to you.
Thank you so much joining us for the World Federation Neurology YouTube channel and social media channel. I know that things are quite busy in Kyoto with all of us facing this pandemic, but it is still worthwhile that we chat to you, given that you have been involved with World Federation Neurology for a long period of time. Today, it's going to be a little bit different. I want our viewers to come to know about you. So tell us about your journey from your high school days to World Federation Neurology today. Take us through the journey. How did you become interested in medicine? What made you to be interested in brain health and neurology? And how you did get involved with the World Federation Neurology?
Okay, I'm getting old and it's a long story. I'll try to make it short. After graduating from high school, I got into Kyoto University School of Medicine. And during that time, I was quite much interested in the function of the brain, which is quite enigmatic to me, and still I am. And I think brain would be a major field that I like to work on. And then I chose neurology because neurology was beginning to start in most of the old universities. And so I got interested in that new field. And after graduating from Kyoto University, I did my residency for 4 years, and then I got a clinical fellowship at the University of Pennsylvania. And basically, my mentor at the time was EMG. I was trained as an electromyographer. And I got interested in doing EMG. And it's very interesting to know the answer by the end of the EMG session. So it's quite interesting to do each session at that time.
Ryuji, at that time, am I correct saying that Austin Sumner was at Pennsylvania at that time?
Yeah.
And this was like golden era of neurophysiology, wasn't it? It's like...
well, and by chance, Professor John England, who is the chief editor of our journal, was my colleague and a fellow clinical fellow at the same time. So I was just betting the clinical diagnosis with him on lunchbox and make a bet on the diagnosis, electrophysiological diagnosis. And after the session, we enjoyed chatting, discussing everything on the pathophysiology of the disease. So that was very good old days.
And they're both two great human beings, both John England and the Austin Sumner, aren't they?
John is very good, and Austin was a very good teacher to me. And then I got interested in physiology of conduction block, and because Austin was very keen at the physiology of conduction block at the time, and then I made a rat model of multiple sclerosis. And then I made some physiological observation on it. And what intrigued me was the Woodhoff phenomenon. If you do exercise or get body temperature up, and then the patient got worse. And then what is the mechanism for that? And then I'm quite much interested in that. And then conduction block was reproducing that rat model. And then that was later on published in Brain. And I first found that digitalis is very effective in reversing conduction block. And so I was quite much excited about it. And then I tried to publish in many good journals like Science. And then I wasn't able to publish it, but it was truly effective in that rat model. But sadly enough, if you use the same dose in humans, the heart stops before conduction block is relieved. And so that was a very sad thing, but that is one way of treating multiple sclerosis patients symptomatically. And some patients, especially in Europe, is now enjoying having 4-aminopyridine for symptomatic treatment. And so that's the way that I explored everything in that at that time. And,
I would spend, Ryuji, I would spend a minute or two for the benefit of youngsters. Yes. I did have a chat with Austin Sumner a few days back, so you would see the video of him. I realized that when I was talking to him a long time ago, before we had any idea how multiple sclerosis occur, as a young man, he worked with Ian MacDonald in Dunedin, basically exactly looking at similar things in a cat model. And he told me that how painfully they were spending long hours, but with a lot of joy, trying to find the disease mechanism. The reason that I'm spending some time here is to remind our young folks that understanding why certain disease occur in any part of the body, certainly in brain, is of huge importance. That's the key to unravel further mysteries later on. So I'm not surprised that being a clever and wise man you wanted to understand why, what's the mechanism of Uthap phenomenon in MS at that time using your rat model. Keep going.
Simply, Austin was my boss at the time, and that's the major reason. But I'm very much interested in that quite soon. And because if you observe the patient or listen to the patients, and then they describe various kind of very unique phenomena like Udohos and other things. And so there might be a way to improve, at least physiologically, for those patients. So I'm quite much interested in pathophysiology and possible treatments as well. And then I got MS Society grant in the US, and that made me stay 2 more years. And but Digitalis project was unsuccessful because of that reason.
Toxicity.
And toxicity. But I still think that some derivative or some analog of Digitalis could be effective in reversing conduction block. And then after I got back to Japan with Professor Jun Kimura, he is also electromyographer. And I found multifocal motor neuropathy patient, and which was reversed in terms of conduction block after IVIG, and which was first reported in neurology in '92. And multifocal motor neuropathy is a kind of, as Austin says, peripheral nerve multiple sclerosis. And the conduction block is also very focal and sometimes reversible. And so IVIG was quite effective for CIDP, but MMN is a kind of AS-like disease and quite very interesting in terms of the diagnosis, because that makes a big change in the prognosis of the patient. And so I'm also interested in the dark side of that diagnosis, that is ALS as EMGR. And then I naturally got into the physiology of ALS and some other diseases. And I found that you have to change the disease cause with early diagnosis of any disease process at the time. And I was fortunate enough to become an executive member of IFCN, International Federation of Clinical Neurophysiology. And then I proposed an expert symposium on early electrodiagnosis of ALS in Awaji Island, because at the time I was chairing a neurology in Tokushima. So Awaji Island is a very beautiful island next to Tokushima. And then we got Awaji criteria, now very well known, I think. And using that early diagnosis criteria for the first time, we've got a clinical trial. The result would be presented in WC in 2021, which is very exciting. And as an EMG, I encountered a patient who cannot write with a pen, but can nicely use chopsticks.
Right.
Then I got interested in so the clinical diagnosis before referral to me was entrapment neuropathy, pronator teres syndrome. But I'm quite much dubious about the diagnosis. And then I encountered a very strange disease at the time, which was kind of psychogenic disorder. Because using chopsticks are much more complicated than using a pen. And so I was also interested in dystonia. And I imported botulinum treatment from the US with June at the time. And I made the first clinical trial in lower limb spasticity, which was successful. And then I got in the business of botulinum treatment as well.
It's interesting that you mentioned that people initially thought them as psychogenic. When I read David Marsden's work on dystonia, I came to know that in Melbourne, there were a reasonable number of senior academic colleagues at that time who completed award-winning theses describing the psychopathology of dystonia. And I read somewhere that someone got a chapter into his or her thesis, basically that you turn your head away like this, as if you are moving away from stress, which obviously the debunk by Marsden and other colleagues later on.
Right. It's another story, very interesting. In Japan, many workers in the same room with his or her boss at one side. Right. And that guy was very unfortunate enough to have some stress with his boss, and then he tried to turn off the side of the boss, and then he got torticollis like that. Right. But once he develops that, trihexyphenidyl was very effective in that case. So that is quite different from a typical psychogenic. And then I think this, I agreed with Professor Marsden's view. This is a basal ganglia disorder because trihexyphenidyl is also effective in Parkinson's and blah, blah, blah. And so I do think that the psychogenic is a kind of a term that we don't understand the case.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The brain has various functions. If you look from the inside, that's like psychogenic. But if you look from outside, that's part of functional, truly functional or organic disease. So I do think that the way that we regard so-called psychogenic movement disorders are also very interesting. And some of them respond to treatment. But anyway,
it's very much like, Ryuji, when I do a round with residents, when I was given a diagnosis of complex migraine, I sort of pause and I tell them that we make this diagnosis when we don't know what is actually wrong with the patient. There's no such a diagnosis as complex migraine.
Yeah, that's right. So there are always a certain degree of overlay of psychogenic component. So if you pick up those psychogenic component, every neurological disease is regarded as psychogenic. So that's one thing that we should avoid to understand the patient. So I completely agree with you. And I think the way that's around the way that I came to. Then I was elected as a trustee of WFN after completing Awaji criteria at IFCN, and then I worked for Asia Initiative, and Tissa, you helped me a lot at the time, and AOCN was quite much successful, at least in Melbourne. And then after that, the two successive meeting was also successful. And so you guys in Australia helped me a lot. And then AOAN, the body that runs AOCN, was also quite much activated through your helps. And I'm very, very grateful to you.
It's pleasure. Actually, when we look back over last 10, 15 years, Asia has really stepped up its game in neurology. Right. And in fact, as you are aware, as part of this World Brain Day campaigns, I have been reaching out to many colleagues as best as I can. And it's quite inspiring to see a young neurologist who had been to various places and come back and establish various things. You would see, I have spoken with a couple of Thai neurologists who establish anti-aquaporin antibodies, anti-NMO antibodies. Right. The inspiring stories. Last night, I was talking to one of the Sri Lankan neurotoxicology researcher, a very young guy, by full professor already. It was mind-blowing when I heard that he managed to discover 10 new species of freshwater fish with the help of a mentor who was trained in King's before. I think these sort of global initiatives and networks help people to extract best out of their brain, irrespective of the resources, isn't it?
Right. I agree. And we do have very unique diseases or disorders in Asia. For example, in the field of dystonia, we have so-called Lubbock disease or XDP, X-linked dystonia Parkinsonism, in Panay Island, in the Philippines, and all over the world. We also found the gene causing it, and we are trying to develop, that's a retrotransposon disease, and we tried to develop genetic treatment by use of siRNA. And so there are a number of things that is unique in Asia, and NMO, as you mentioned, with the aquaporin antibodies, also a major disease. And so we have to look at it, and we will have to solve the enigma, and we have to look into the possible treatment or prevention.
I think I agree, Ryuji. I think despite the difficulty being able to travel, we as a human species, we found a way to connect with each other anyway. Your successful Japanese Neurology Society virtual symposium is one nice such example. And then Virtual Movement Disorders Congress, another such example. Let's hope that our own World Congress in October will also be such a good example also. I think finding solutions would depend on how we connect senior clinicians and juniors and the networks between countries and regions, share knowledge, share expertise, share wisdom, and then keep answering questions. I think your leadership in those Asia initiative were quite instrumental on certain the things that we now being able to reap, as I can see regionally, and we still have a lot of work to do. Same in Africa also, as you are aware.
That's right. I do agree, and the main thing in this Stop Multiple Sclerosis campaign in World Brain Day 2021 is we will probably have to think about equal access to the newly developed very effective drugs for multiple sclerosis, one thing. So we also have multiple sclerosis, typical demyelinative type in Asia. So, but not all the Asian countries or all the developing countries, Africa and any other countries, are not accessible fully to these drugs. So we are having a kind of new business style after the pandemic, sort of the new normal. And so as the WHO is claiming for the vaccination of COVID-19 as a COVAX project, so equal access for all the countries to that treatment or vaccination. So the similar approach should be possible to multiple sclerosis worldwide. So that's one thing I like to see in the future, near future.
I think you hit the nail on the head. This was one of the main reason for us to choose multiple sclerosis, which you are well aware as a trustee, of course, and that's why we wanted to have this ambitious campaign to see that we would see at least 2.8 million posts related to brain health World Brain Day this year to match the number of MS patients. And as you very correctly pointed out, 70% of the world at this point of time can't access these medications. Just like we tackle, as you correctly pointed out, the COVID-19 with COVAX, the similar approach can be taken. I think that's a great idea.
Yes, on top of that, the prevention and treatment of NMO is not fully developed yet. So that's one thing I'd like to see in the future. Sorry. So I think there are a number of things that WH and WFN to do in the near future. And I do think that the younger generation than myself, like yourself, Tissa, is very much expected to do a lot of things together with the rest of the world. And I do appreciate your help. You at first just organized younger generation group in the World Federation, and now you are getting more mature age, and now it's your time to change everything in the new era of new normal. So yes.
I agree. This year, as part of the World Brain Day campaign, I reached out to many youngsters. You would see interviews with medical students, first-year trainees, people who try to get into neurology. I invite Japanese colleagues also to submit their videos, send their messages across the board. In fact, my ambition is to see 1,000+ videos if we can, given that we live in a virtual world. Together we are much more stronger rather than individually. And you mentioned a very important theme of we being getting old and why we need more younger people on board also. I was telling some of the younger colleagues when I was interviewing them, in wildlife, there are the rare birds, as you are aware that birds use their calling or calls to attract their female partners. That's how they convince which person to get hold of, to get married in birding language, if you like. But I read somewhere that certain rare bird species, they are losing their ability to make this call. The reason being, more junior birds, they learn how to sing better by watching how the seniors sing and impress their female birds. So as the number of seniors have become less with deforestation and this and that, the younger birds, there's no place for them to learn. So so it is very important that we have these both groups connect so that we can impart, we can get the young enthusiasm come on board, but at the same time, we need to harness the expertise from seniors. This was one of the reasons that I was wanting to talk to people like Austin Sumner and others, because who has a lot of stories that we would absolutely have no idea of. Even you mentioning that you and John England betting with each other for the diagnosis. I think those sort of things need to be recorded and heard by younger generation, so that they can see that this is not a competition. This is about collaboration. This is about working together to solve problems. So you mentioned a very useful and important theme here. Keep going.
Yes. So for the last part, probably I have to give the younger generation as the take-home message of my my talk. And at the time, we made a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis in the United States when I was a clinical fellow. There was not very much effective therapy other than steroids. And so I simply passed a kind of brochure to the patient. And that brochure was produced by National Health
NIH, National Institute of Health.
Yes, NIH. And on top of that, it says hope through research. And so I think for NMO or other diseases we have to tackle on, it is still meaningful to say to the patient that hope through research. We are doing research right now to give a kind of treatment effective for your disease. So that's one thing. And now, as for the demyelinated type, multiple sclerosis has come to the age of maturation, and the so many effective drugs available. And now that motto should go to hope through research and worldwide collaboration. And so I like to put worldwide collaboration and to make equal access to the newly developed drugs would be a major thing that we have to do in the near future. And so that's my take-home message to the younger generation.
I totally agree. I think you hit the nail on the head. The current day true game-changing thing is collaboration. It's all about collaboration. If you are a super competitor, well, you must replace the word competition with collaboration. You can't compete unless you are a great collaborator. I mean, the best example is Japan. Japan is so successful in most of the scientific endeavors with a bunch of Nobel Prize winning academics that we heard directly at the beautiful meeting that you all organized in Kyoto. And that was possible. Yes, Japanese scientists were clever, but at the same time, they collaborated with other clever people, and they did a lot of work together, isn't it? Your mentor, Gene Kimura, is such a good example to show how much collaboration would help you to get more things out of the way. So that's a good take-home message for youngsters.
Yes. And enjoy what you're doing.
Absolutely. Yes. Be passionate on what you do. My last question before we finish off, Ryuji, I know that you work hard, but you also have a family and you have some spare times also. So when you don't hold the EMG needle or making a sort of demyelinating multifocal motor neuropathy type activity, or not with a WFN trustee meeting, how do you spare time? How do you manage your work-life balance?
Well, it's a very good question. My hobby is sailing.
Right.
And I have a very old cruiser, sailor, and that is more than 40 years of age.
Right.
And you know, every time I set out for sail, the engine stops or some wires are broken, and anything could happen. So my true hobby is repairing an old boat rather than sailing itself. But I enjoy it very much.
Right. Ryuji, it had been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and we wish you all the very best. We wish your family all the very best also. And your contribution to global brain health had been tremendous over the years, and your support during our much younger period. Now we are now almost categorizing as old now. Was quite appreciated also. And during this difficult time, stay safe, stay well, and all the very best.
Yeah, the same to you and your family.
And please encourage Japanese colleagues, especially youngsters, to visit the World Brain Day website,
right.
download our toolbox, and make
right.
posting in their Facebook, Twitter, and other things. I am determined to get 2.8 million posts this time, then we can pass 100 million worldwide.
You're working very hard. Thank you.
All the best, Ryuji.